CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Donald Trump's first State of the Union address was long on rhetoric but very short on policy detail. We'll be looking at one area that got scant mention: international trade. And also in America, there have been reports that Donald Trump's national security team is looking into plans to take over the infrastructure of America's 5G network in order, they say, to counter the threat from Beijing. We'll be asking why. Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. A year into Donald Trump's presidency, he has delivered a wide-ranging State of the Union address to Congress. But through his 82-minute speech, it was upbeat, but it has also been criticized for being high on emotions but lacking in details about his future policies. International watchers in particular were disappointed that he only devoted less than 2 minutes to international trade. And although he didn't name names, his digs at unfair trade and protecting intellectual property rights appear to have been directed in the main at China. Where did he mention China? Where he did mention China, he caught China together with Russia, countries that pose horrible dangers to the US. So let's talk about it. Joining me for the discussion are Dr. Douglas Paal, Vice President for Asia Studies at the Asia Program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and Dr. Zhao from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Before we start the discussion, let's first take a listen to what he said about China and Russia.
World, we face rogue regimes, terrorist groups, and rivals like China and Russia that challenge our interests, our economy, and our values. In confronting these horrible dangers, we know that weakness is the surest path to conflict, and unmatched power is the surest means to our true and great defense. For this reason, I am asking Congress to end the dangerous defense sequester and fully fund our great military.
Dr. Paal, let me come to you first. Having heard what President Trump said about China and what he plans to do, asking Congress for fully funding the military, what is your take, first impression?
Well, this is consistent with the rhetoric and formal statements that have come out of the Trump administration since the return from his long trip to Asia, including to Beijing. They clearly have in mind justifying a very substantial increase in defense spending by playing up the threats from Russia and China and terrorist groups. And I think we'll see that fought out in the Congress now going forward once his budget is submitted.
Well, he didn't really mention terrorist groups. Basically, he singled out China and Russia for the reason to supporting a stronger military. Dr. Zhao, what kind of philosophy is behind President Trump's thinking?
I think there are two reasons behind his rhetoric just now. Number one is his new idea of what is based upon the theoretical thinking about U.S. strategy towards the world, which is called principled realism. And he sees the world as great powers competing with each other, and it is totally a zero-sum game. So in this game, the U.S. needs to beef up its own defense and spending more on its military, particularly modernizes its military towards other major countries, preparing for major wars. And that's a reason, an excuse particularly, for him and his administration to raise and to break through the sequestration and raise military spending and get purchase all the major big ticket items like F-35 fighter jets and also warships, and also improve its nuclear arsenal. And also it has to satisfy its domestic audience. That is to say, using Russia and China as a target of threat to justify its increase for military spending and satisfy the needs of its military industrial complex.
Well, Dr. Paal, what is your reaction to what Dr. Zhao said now? And also, what kind of danger do you think there is by playing up the threat from China and Russia?
Well, I mean, this remark in the State of the Union was typical of State of the Union remarks where you make very, very light reference to foreign affairs. So if you take this and then add to it the National Security Strategy published a month and a half ago and the National Defense Strategy published a couple weeks ago, you do see an administration that's taking an across-the-board approach to confrontation of China over economic, ideological, and territorial disputes. And to me, it's a remarkable, I think Dr. Zhao characterized it correctly, it's a remarkable and probably counterproductive approach. Yeah, there are areas of friction and there are areas of cooperation, but this emphasis on the friction doesn't take us down a very positive path.
When he mentioned unmatched power, Dr. Zhao, what do you think he's really talking about here?
Well, I think on the one hand, the U.S. maintain its military dominance globally, and also the U.S. want to maintain its influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Now it's revised into so-called Indo-Pacific region. And on the other hand, U.S. also want to maintain its economic leadership in the world, particularly in high-tech. So I think that's why in the national national security strategy report, the U.S. mentioned that it has to maintain its national innovation base. And in this area, the U.S. want to compete with other countries and maintain its generational lead. So I think overall, the Trump administration is determined to make America first and continue this path with more investments in those areas.
Dr. Paal, earlier today, the spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs reacted to this sentence, saying it is Cold War mentality, and of course China is not happy with this kind of remarks. Do you think China is overreacting?
Probably not. I think it is Cold War language that's coming out of the United States. I've been briefed privately and I've read all the public documents, and there's a kind of superficial confrontationalism that is at the tops of the heads of these officials in the Trump administration. This is going to play out over months. I don't know that the American people are eager to see all the features that are going to come with this, but they do welcome improved expenditure on research and development for a high-tech world. They do approve appropriate defense. And, you know, we've talked a lot about America's position in the Asia-Pacific in particular in this context. The Obama administration did very little during its time in office. They talked about rebalance to Asia, but they really never concretely changed the situation. And there is growing frustration here that our rhetoric has not been matched by our commitment of resources. And so I think there'll be some responsiveness to that from the Congress.
Okay, let's take a listen to what President Trump said about trade, about unfair trade that has been damaging the U.S. economy. Let's listen to this.
America has also finally turned the page on decades of unfair trade deals that sacrificed our prosperity and shipped away our companies, our jobs, and our wealth. Our nation has lost its wealth, but we're getting it back so fast. The era of economic surrender is totally over. From now on, we expect trading relationships to be fair and, very importantly, reciprocal. We will work to fix bad trade deals and negotiate new ones, and they'll be good ones, but they'll be fair. And we will protect American workers and American intellectual property through strong enforcement of our trade rules.
Dr. Paal, all that President Trump has been mentioning about jobs being stolen, wealth being stolen from the United States, is that really truth?
Well, there are jobs that are lost in this kind of competition, but they are dwarfed by jobs that are lost to automation. The arrival on factory floors of robots over the last several decades is going to continue and probably speed up. So the prospect of creating more jobs for people as opposed to more jobs for robots, not very good in those factory floor industries. However, these trade agreements have exploded in the services sectors, creating all sorts of opportunities for jobs for people who've got the skill sets to adapt to the high-tech industries, entertainment, and other related services. And so it's misleading. It plays to a common appeal to many people, especially the states where Trump was successful in getting the electoral college numbers needed to be elected president. But it directly contradicts what he's doing elsewhere in his macroeconomic policy. So it's a mixed message. It'll only be tested when we have elections and people decide whether they've heard enough and they don't believe him or they still believe him.
By the way, when you talk about the midterm elections, do you think this State of the Union address is going to shore up his chances or not?
I think it has no effect either way. Unless he makes a really huge claim that he can't possibly sustain. But all of these things have been heard before, nothing particularly new from Trump. What will matter in the election typically is, unless there's a late-breaking scandal, the most important factor will always be perception of the public as to whether the economy is growing and creating opportunities for them. Right now it's doing that, so his support level hasn't fallen even further. But the test will come again as we get to the elections in October and November this coming 2018.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Hai, Dr. Zhao, what is the consequence of President Trump repeatedly accusing China or other trading partners of the United States of the things that these countries have are not responsible for?
Yeah. First, I want to follow up with Paul's point that U.S. losing jobs are mostly because of the automation of the technological innovation in the U.S. and also technological innovation is the driver of globalization. And U.S. is major benefactor of globalization. U.S. wealth actually is gaining from this whole globalization process. So I think it's wrong for President Trump to point out that U.S. is losing jobs and losing wealth to the world. And on the other hand, President Trump in his State of the Union address said that it's important for job training. One of the major reasons that his base has grievance against globalization is because when they lose the manufacturer job, they can only find low-paying service jobs. That's why their income is decreasing. At the same time, top 1% of Americans is gaining more from this globalization process. So I think for Trump to miss that major point and to only emphasize on the deficit of trade with China, it's totally mistaken. So coming back to your question is that if American adopt disruptive trade measures against China, it's going to disrupt the whole globalization process. Now the production is globalized, and only address one aspect of it will affect others. So not only it will hurt U.S.-China relations, other countries like Japan, South Korea, Germany, and other countries supplying parts to China will also get hurt. And in reverse, U.S. will definitely get hurt. So I think this is a lose-lose game, and no one should go there.
Dr. Paul, do you think President Trump is just talking harsh, or he's really ready to take the risks and reclaim the ground that he claims that the U.S. has been stolen?
I don't know the answer to your question. The first trade measure taken, and we expect a number of them to come up on the calendar over the next 4 or 5 months. The first one was the announcement on solar cells and washing machine quotas and tariffs. This was really negligible in its impact on China. It had a substantial impact on the Republic of Korea, South Korea. But in the overall scheme of things, it's just a bump in the road. The next issue up will be intellectual property rights, which he mentioned in his State of the Union address. And that could lead to substantial penalties assigned to China. If that's the case, then it starts to go to war with his macroeconomic objectives. There's a deep contradiction. And so far, he has not indicated he's willing to challenge his macro objectives through the first trade issue that came up. I'll know better and be able to answer your question better after we see how he responds to the so-called 301 case against Chinese theft of intellectual property rights.
We'll keep a close watch on the situation. Many thanks to my two guests, Dr. Douglas Paal, Vice President for Studies at the Asia Program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and Dr. Zhao from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And here is my first point. America being the most powerful country on earth, the state of its union is also of importance to us beyond its borders. As I started to listen to his speech, my question was, how has America under Trump impacted people in other parts of the world? What I have been able to patch together was an American-centric view, or I actually put it as an American-centric abacus, only calculating interests and returns with hardly a superficial mention of its global, even a superficial mention of its global commitment as a member, especially a leading member of the global village. He wanted to be more calculating about providing aid to the needy. He wanted to beef up the military to counter horrible dangers from China and Russia. He wanted to modernize the nuclear arsenal to deter any acts of aggression. By the way, whether that's going to work, we're going to discuss tomorrow, by any other nation or anyone else for that matter. And it was the sovereign right of the U.S. to decide which city could be the capital of another country. Right through to the end, I realized he had already answered my question in his very first paragraph when he said, each day since he took office, they have gone forward with a clear vision and a righteous mission to make America great again for all Americans. What about other people in the world? I hope he's not just saying just for Americans. You're watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from my room.
I'm members of this.
Mark, what can you tell us about events happening there?
Politics.
This is a pretty picture. Time you can see a band.
Back over to Beijing.
To go after them.
All about
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference.
According to a senior administration official, U.S. President Donald Trump's national security team is looking at plans to build the infrastructure for a super-fast 5G wireless network to counter the threat of China spying. But he also added that the option was being debated at a low level in the administration and was 6 to 8 months away from being considered by the president himself. However, the idea was soon criticized by many sides, believing it would heavily disrupt the existing market order and the technical development process. So what is being proposed exactly, and why is Beijing again the target here? Joining me for the discussion are Scott Schober, a cybersecurity expert and CEO of Berkeley Veritronic Systems, and here in the studio, Ina Tangen, current affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First of all, Mr. Schober, explain to us the details of this proposal, please.
Well, certainly there's great concern, I think, for everybody, be it the U.S., be it in China, be it abroad, because some of these things that are being proposed would be extremely difficult to actually achieve. They would have a number of years to catch up, because if you think about it, all of the major carriers behind the 5G build-out have spent enormous sums of money and development of technology, and there's many partnerships formed. So for the U.S. to kind of jump in in the middle of this would cause nothing but chaos, and it would slow down the actual build-out. So I think a lot more of this is probably talk and rhetoric than actual action that's going to take place, at least from my perspective. Now, there are certainly some challenges out there because the U.S., you could see, strongly feels, and from the White House, that there is a high probability that if China wins the race to the 5G technology build-out, it could greatly affect security in the nation here within the United States. And I think they look back a lot on some of the history where there's been battles back and forth, be it with Huawei and Cisco and many other battles that have unfolded. And I think some of the trust has been broken down over time there, and they're reacting to that now, looking forward to the future build-out.
I see. Aina, explain a little bit first, why is 5G such a hotly contested topic?
Okay, first off, you have to understand 5G is not a thing. It's a set of standards that will basically increase your internet connectivity over your phone by 10 times. Not only 10 times as fast, but 10 times as many devices can connect to it. So what they do is they set up a 5G standard, and then everybody's making a race to it. Right now, Huawei, which is testing out their system actually in the Netherlands, funnily enough, along with Sony Ericsson, is getting quite close. They've done it. They've shown that it is capable, that they can reach these standards. And the reason that everyone is so concerned about this is because the connected world, when we start talking about big data, the ability to connect all of these sensors that are all around and put them into this big data and see what exactly is going on, and in some cases to control these things. This is why people are starting to say, okay, wait a second, what is going on and what do we have to do to secure ourselves?
Yeah, how do you look at the fact that China has been used as the reason why they need to do that? Basically, I understand that the US government wants to build all the infrastructure part for the 5G system before the possibility can be open to any Chinese companies being involved in that infrastructure construction. Aina.
Well, the 5G infrastructure is, I mean, everybody's racing towards it. There is, as has been pointed out by our friend in America, it is huge amounts of money, $600 million already by Huawei alone, with more being poured in every year. Every other company out there is trying to race to this standard. So, you know, when you start looking at everything that is on the line, yeah, it's very important. Why would the U.S. want to control this? Maybe there is some fear that China is getting a little bit ahead. I mean, even beyond 5G, what China has done with quantum entanglement, this idea that you can separate two molecules, put them at 1,400 kilometers apart, and when you do something to one, it automatically happens to another. There are no wires. And I think there might be some concern that the U.S. is behind on this race and that they need to somehow be proactive and go at it. It might be just, as said, a bunch of symbols, just throwing it out there. Trump is not above sending white rabbits out and then denying that he's doing that or just seeing what the reaction will be.
Yeah, Mr. Schober, from where you are in this business. Is it really possible that although China contributed greatly to the setting up of the international 5G standard, it is not possible for Chinese companies to go and spy on the US simply because it is, China played a big part in the standard settings phase?
Well, when it comes to spying and espionage, to be honest with you, China spies on the U.S., the U.S. spies on China. All countries have espionage, and they do spy on one another. The larger threat, I think, as your guest mentioned there, especially with 5G, it's a little bit different when we look back just a number of years to 3G. There was a very defined footprint and standards that were set where certain countries use certain technologies. The U.S. focused on CDMA deployment here very aggressively, yet if you go to different parts of Europe, it would be predominantly GSM for 3G, third-generation technologies. 5G is a little different. I look at it more as a global type of footprint for telecommunications, and again, tied in closely with the Internet. And as was pointed out before, what is so different now is you have the IoT devices, Internet of Things. Everything we do, from our smartwatches, our smart homes, autonomous cars in the not-too-distant future, everything will be tied in wirelessly through a 5G conduit, this new network. So it's extremely powerful. Whoever rules this rules the world in a sense. So that's why everybody is racing so fast to get to the same endpoint.
Now, since the document was leaked, the plan has been strongly opposed by different parties, including the bosses of the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, and CTIA, or the Wireless Association. Why would this plan cause so much rebound within these organizations?
Well, I think certainly if you look immediately, FCC took an immediate stance on this. CTIA, which we're certainly a member of, and we also weigh in on different matters for FCC, just to point that out. They've taken a strong stand after what just happened with net neutrality and repealing that back. They don't want to disrupt things that are already in the line in the sand, as it were. And what they've clearly said is, if the government, the U.S. government, steps in and tries to build out 5G technology, what it's going to do is going to stifle innovation. It's not going to happen as quickly. It's going to hurt all the investment from the privatized side, the wireless carriers, who have spent significant amount of money. It just doesn't make sense. They think the private sector can really drive innovation and drive investment, and I agree with that.
Well, unlike China, the U.S. telecommunications market is also shared by several big private companies which have already spent billions of dollars on 5G technology research and development work. Ina, so what will be the impacts on them if the government entirely or partly takes over the infrastructure?
Well, there'll be a mad scramble to be the one that whose technology is adopted, and this is really not something that they were anticipating. This is really, I mean, really out of the blue. You know, Trump is supposed to be a pro-market guy. He's supposed to, you know, say he's trying to encourage innovation and all this type of thing. And for him to throw this out there is a real non-starter. I mean, the chairman of the FCC, who he just recently appointed, just came out. He's an industry guy. He said, no, I would not agree to this.
Will the federal government has the funding necessary for that kind of infrastructure? Because President Trump talked about building up America's infrastructure, saying the state government need to pair what the federal government gives in any infrastructure project. Will that happen here?
Well, he's asked for 1.5 trillion. He has some sort of way in which he wants to leverage it. Basically, he'd have 300 trillion and try to use that to leverage local, state, and private funds and things like that. But none of this has been played out for real. It's not clear that he could do it. It's not clear that the government would be capable of bringing this to where it needs to be, and there would be a mad scramble. I think a lot of its industry people would be against him. There'd be a major play in Washington, D.C. as K Street ramped up to make sure that this never happened.
Mr. Schober, finally, are you worried that this plan would finally go through? If not, what kind of future philosophy are you seeing within the Trump administration that might get into what the market should decide?
Well, I think if this really played out more fully, reality is it's probably a combination of the two if it ever took light. In other words, the government can't do this on their own. It'd be decades behind. It only makes sense if there was a partnership of sorts between private and government working together. Maybe the private side, with the build out of the infrastructure that they've done to date, would work with the government, and the government would finance it and try to help fast track it working together. Unfortunately, when government gets involved in innovation and technology, it usually stifles it. So I don't see a big win for the U.S. government to jump in here and try to take over 5G build out and reinvent the wheel. It makes no sense from a technology perspective. Okay,
thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Scott Schober, cybersecurity expert and CEO of Berkeley Veritronics Systems, and Ina Tangen, current affairs commentator. And that is it for this edition of The Point. As usual, follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.